My name is Deborah Thompson, and I'm a resident of Beacon Hill. And I lived there the majority of my life, except when I was married. So
What do you do?
I'm retired. So all I do now is tiring. So, and I work in the yard and miscellaneous things that retired people do. So.
Well, as I said before, the name is Ella Tolbert, and currently I'm living in a retirement facility, but I grew up in Beacon Hills at 1302 East 26th Street. That was my home, and was a unique structure in that it was a log house. So from that perspective, I've been staying in touch with what happens in Beacon Hills because growing up there, I have so many memories. So I would say that Beacon Hills is a very close-knit community running from 27th Street to 21st Street on the north, from Paseo to, at one point, Troost on the west, but now they have kind of crossed over Troost. And no, not necessarily.
Because we start at 22nd.
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 And we go west to Troost. At that particular time, 27th Street was as far south as African Americans could go. And so we were living from the river all the way up to 27th. There was one area that was a little further south and east, which was called Round Top or Leeds, where blacks predominantly lived, for my mother lived there with her father. So we've been in that community for quite a while, and it was just another community where a number of professional blacks grew up and lived. We had several doctors, we had a couple of principals, so that was, and teachers as well. So those are the primary professions of some of the residents of Beacon Hill. Well, growing up, of course, you know, your parents tend to shelter you quite a bit. And so the experiences that they have, they don't bring them home too much. Just let you enjoy it. I was able to enjoy my childhood. But for the most part, I kind of became aware of some situation when I would see these very heavy-set young women walking 2 by 2 in the neighborhood. And being curious, I asked my mother, where are they going and what are they doing? And she said, oh, they're just probably out for a walk. Well, she decided not to tell me that these young ladies were pregnant, and they were all white. And there was a fondling home or a place where they would come and have their babies and give them up for adoption. But I found that out only after I grew up. So those kind of experiences, there weren't any black girls walking with them. I wanted to know why. And I had all that natural curiosity of a kid. But Mother just decided what she would tell me and what I would find out later. And we would just see them walking 2 by 2, but there was never any interaction or anything.
And was the foundling home, was it part of the hospital?
It was on the side, on the 27th Street side. The hospital was on the West Paseo side, so didn't pick up on the connection there at all. But it was rumored that it was a hospital for folks who were a little off.
And as an African American, could you go to any hospital as a young woman?
No.
Could you just go
I had
here?
to go to Wheatley Hospital, or if you were to a regular hospital, you had to go after dark.
And did you experience that?
I worked, and my mother was a nurse at Wheatley, but never had to go. Well, I take that back. I went to General Hospital for something. I don't remember what it was, but because I was too young at that point. I remember the lady that lived in the back of us was a school teacher, that nobody liked. And she had a pear tree in her backyard that I used to delight in climbing on that pear tree. We played, everybody, the kids in the neighborhood got together, we played jacks, we played hide and seek, all kind of games. All hours of the day and into the night. We didn't lock our doors. That was just walking in people's houses. We were just all so friendly and interactive. And I used to eat grapes off of a grapevine. Mother made grape jelly. So just kind of simple childhood enjoyments, no traumatic events or anything of that nature.
Well, my parents moved there probably, I would say around 1956, judging from some papers I had about my adoption. And I know at one time we lived on 25th and Wabash. So when they moved 28th Terrace, I think they were probably some of the first blacks moving past 27th Street. Being probably 4 when we moved there, I don't remember a lot. So I know there was a lady across the street as I got older. She used to always make these little pies, little cakes rather, in a pan, and would have 1 pecan on it. And I remember my mother was telling me I would sit out there on the stoop, and she would always try to get me to come across the street, but I wouldn't. But, you know, growing up, I played with Aunt Joe's kids, because she lived on the corner then as we got older, and we played in the street. We knew everybody on the block. We knew everybody blocks, to the south and north of us. So it was a fun time, growing up. For me, growing up, everything was fine. Like Aunt Joe mentioned, your parents kept you a lot of things away from you. So you didn't know the prejudice that were in the city and things like that, but it was always a fun place. We had the park up the street. We would, play up there. And I don't really have any bad memories growing up. I do remember when I was older, when Martin Luther King got assassinated, and there were the riots. But my childhood was great. And it was fun. No problems whatsoever. And we used to always, as we got older, truce was very well established. We had the Jones store, post office, a theater. What was a fun drugstore? Cats.
Yeah.
Was always a fun place. It was designed differently, and I always remember they had a parking lot on the west side, and it went around to the troops, and there was a parking underneath, and it was just a fun place. You'd go in there, the candy was up front, you did your school shopping there. I remember getting school supplies and things like that. So everything was up on Troops. We had anything you needed, you can get up there. So, And I remember smelling the bread at Wonder Bread Bakery. That was always
All right.
a good feeling.
The milkman delivered milk to the door.
In bottles.
And they even brought the bread truck, man, a baker bread truck would come around.
That.
Yeah, so.
I remember Siltest.
Yeah.
We got Siltest milk.
All right. Well, I went to Wendell Phillips grade school, which was down on Vine Street, walking distance. Then later to Lincoln High School on Woodland, 21st and Woodland, walking distance. I also went to R.T. Cole's at 19th and Tracy, walking distance. A long way. So, those were the 3 schools that I attended in that area. There was quite a few of the training classes, auto mechanics, carpentry. I don't think there was a beauty shop or anything like that, but that was primarily for trades, more of a trade school than so you could learn a trade if you didn't want to go on to, you're just on your way to not finishing high school or whatever. So that was what R.T. Cole's was primarily for.
I went to school at Linwood, which was located at the corner of Linwood and Woodland, which is now the home of Macedonia Baptist Church. I think it was, I can't remember when they tore it down, but it was more of a modern school compared to the brick schools. It was like just 2 levels. And let's see, I went to Lincoln Junior my 7th year, and then my parents put me in Lillis, which is a Catholic school, and that's where I graduated. High school. I mean, I'm the best person that anybody would know at this moment. But I was prepared well. You know, our teachers were caring and knowledgeable. I think my career ended when one day a group of us went downtown and applied at the phone company, and we got hired. So actually the school didn't have anything to do with that. It was just on GP that we, you know, got hired there, and that's where I stayed till I retired. I started at Southwestern Bell, and Southwestern Bell, then when I retired it was considered SBC, and now it is AT&T.
I don't know that they did other than teach me how to read and write, which I developed a lot of that at home because my father worked at a bank, and he would bring home Life magazine and National Geographic. So at a very early age I just read. I didn't have brothers or sisters, so when I wasn't out playing with the kids I was reading. And so with that I wanted to be a librarian. I guess that just went hand in hand. Not overly ambitious to do any great grand thing, but that would have been sufficient for me because I knew I could continue to read. So I learned how to do the switchboard at telephone company. And then I worked on the switchboard at Internal Revenue and at GSA. Now this is when I was grown and had children, and I had my first experience with segregation. One of the things that happened when I was answering the phone at General Services, oftentimes they would say, well, I hear you got a colored girl working there, but I don't ever get her when I call. And sometimes I would say, well, yes, we do have. Other times I would say, well, I am that colored girl. And they would then reply, well, you don't sound colored. So, and this, since GSA did business all across the country, it was amazing to me how simple word of somebody who was black working in that capacity could go out everywhere. And the same thing happened when I ended up at Bendix. I was a clerk in an all-male office, except for me. And the same thing would happen. They would call down, and my boss would answer the phone after I had passed it on to him, and I hear you got a colored girl down there. Every time I call her, I don't ever catch her. And he would kind of laugh, and he would look at me and say, well, she's sitting right here. So there were a lot of eye-opening experiences getting out to see just how there were certain expectations. If you're colored, you got to sound colored, whatever that is. And that was really an eye-opener. The other thing was, at one point, I had learned how to operate a teletype. That was in the Internal Revenue Office. And when I was at GSA, my supervisor did not know how to operate the teletype. And I saw firsthand just how desperate she was to not have to ask me questions. So she read the book, as you know, the standard operating procedures book. But at some point she did have to begin to ask me questions, and I just tried to be as nice as I could and not try to act like a know-it-all. Because the responses that you get, or that I was getting in different situations, were quite a lesson for me. How do you handle this? Do you get mad and cuss everybody out and end up losing your job, or do you just go along with it and write it down and never forget it? So those kind of things, such as when I was working at the Marine Corps, I I was reading Architectural Digest magazine, which was my form of Better Homes and Garden. I love the designs. And this young lady said to me, "Oh, you want to be an architect?" I said, "No, honey, this is just a design book." And this Marine who was sitting somewhere behind me, he said later on, "Well, see, that's what I thought. You're like an Oreo cookie." I said, "Really?" He said, "Black on the outside but white on the inside." And I said, "I'll never forget that remark." So those little things like that just kind of built up. Those were my experiences with, in a way, learning. So I had to not only go on different jobs and try to prepare myself for whatever the response was going to be from either supervisors or co-workers. So while I may have learned some particular skills, I was able to be employed and benefit from learning those skills. So to this very day, it's still unbelievable that people can figure out that some way, because of a skin color, you don't have the same abilities, same blood, or other things. It just gets beyond me that they're maybe not thinking. Because if we would all walk around without the skin, it wouldn't matter. They couldn't tell whether I was black, white, or green. And it still boggles in my mind to this day.
I was comfortable. Even when I divorced, my job paid well. I was able to raise my daughter, get anything I needed or wanted at the time. There's one thing I want to say about prejudice. I know when you're growing up as children, except in this day and time, children don't see color. They don't see it at all. They learn it. And I didn't really experience prejudices till I probably started working. I can't bring up any specific incident at the moment, but I was reading an article the other day, and Michelle Obama was talking. And she was talking about how her and the girls had been out, and she wanted to get some ice cream, and they stopped, and she told the security to stay outside. And they walked in, and they were in line, and this white lady walked in and stood right in front of them and ordered, just like she wasn't there. They didn't see her. And it was like 2 weeks ago. I went to pick up some new glasses, and I go to this shop all the time, and I went in and told the lady, I was picking up glasses. So we did that, and I got out, and I'm always joking and laughing and moving when I, go somewhere. And I went out, and I was adjusting the glasses. I said, "These don't feel right." So I went back in, and the lady at the counter said, "Can I help you? Are you here to pick up glasses?" And I was just in there 5 minutes ago. So as much movement and, laughter and jokes I made, I was invisible to her. Mm-hmm. She couldn't remember 5 minutes that I had just been in there. So it's like, it's never changed. I don't think it will ever change. And it's just, people are so mean and evil. And it's just, you try to figure out why. Because when you know people, there's nothing, that makes them any different from you. So it's just, I don't know. It's like, but I do know that now, my daughter works for child care, and she has made some remarks about kids saying something to her, but it's something they've learned at home. Mm-hmm. Because kids do not see color. Right. Mm-hmm. They don't see it. And if we were good people and stewards of this earth, we wouldn't see it either. I know at one time I was offered a management job, but I would have had to move out of town. And I had a small child, and my support system was here. And I didn't want to take that opportunity. But I never felt that it was a bad move or anything, because my life has been, great in my opinion. Your parents have always explained to you how things are, how you need to behave. But, I consider that I was raised to be respectful to everybody. And I don't see too many differences. Now, this atmosphere now, I'm becoming bitter, and I know that. And I don't like that, but that's the way I feel.
I didn't have a problem with my expenses at all from what I was earning. I did receive some child support up until my daughter was 18, and then later when I remarried, I was able to live comfortably with my husband's salary.
Miss King, and when she was married to you were King then, weren't you? They lived on the corner, 28th Terrace and Purcell. And I still live in my parents' house on 28th Purcell. So that's how we know each other, and I was raised with her children. I guess just playing. Remember what I know growing up, I would always want to spend the night, but I would cry, and my mother would have to come get me because I didn't want to stay awake for some reason. I would always say I was going to spend the night with them, but then I would go home. But I don't know, because as being kids, we really didn't associate with the parents that much.
Right.
So it was just, she was Debbie and Harvey's mother.
Probably about the same thing with the kids doing they interacting with each other. So getting to know her mom, I can remember something that her mom told me that which is another example of strange behavior. She was working out in private families.
Yeah.
And she drove a Cadillac because her dad worked at General Motors.
No, Griffin Wheel.
And,
Griffin Wheel. It was a wheel company.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, when she would drive this car to work, the lady who, mistress of the house, let's say, got a kick out of getting in the car and driving her around impressing her friends, because she didn't have that fine a car. And I'll never forget that. I just thought that was the funniest thing, that the lady had that much sense of humor, because in some places people wouldn't be seen dead acknowledging that this was my maid's Buick or Cadillac or whatever. And that was my fondest memory of her.
Really?
Sharing that with me. I said, oh, I would love to see their faces.
Yeah, because I'm sure you kept me sometime when Mother had to do something, and Mama probably watched Debbie and Harvey. So yeah, I remember that, because I think someone said something like, "Well, how can you afford a Cadillac if you're doing day work?" Mama would say stuff like that, but I never knew that story. Well, when I was growing up, it wasn't really in any institutions. It was more, like a small downtown. And we had the bread store, and I think the Nazarene publishing house was there, but no institutions like the Bible college. I know you had mentioned and stuff like that. Well, it was fun, because I remember as kids, we would always go, we had the dime store. What was it called? Woolworths. We had two. We had Kresge's, I think, and Woolworths. Right. And I would always get a goldfish. And we'd go up there and get my goldfish. And I remember at one time there used to be a popcorn store there. It was right next to the Isis Theater. And they had the best popcorn, but it didn't last. And we had a jewelry store up there. And I remember one time me and this girl, we were walking, kids did that. And we actually, because we went no further than Linwood. And that's where Three Sisters was, and I believe Katz, the drugstore. And we walked down to 35th Street. And there was the Kroger grocery store. We thought we had just went beyond the limit, because we never went past that. But we were like, we're going to be bold today. We're going to travel down the street a little further. But it was just a fun place, because, you went up there, JCPenney's was up there, the normal stores, and it's just walking distance. We had grocery stores, A&P, Milgram's, and Safeway.
Yeah.
All within a 10-block radius, so.
I think about my favorite store was Russell Stover's.
Yes, I forgot that one.
Yes, definitely.
I remember that. You always had chocolate. I remember that now.
Every Christmas, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, my dad would hit Russell Stover, get candy for the family. And actually the day before, the day that he died, I called him from 25th and Brooklyn, where I was in Kentucky Chicken. He'd been sick, so I called to see how he was doing. And he said, well, would you go on up to Russell Stover's and get the candy for you and your mom, and I'll pay you when you get back? And I said, oh, okay, Dad. And I went up to the store, got the candy, got home, and got a call from my mother where Dad had gone to the gentleman's house who was a barber. He had bought a barber shop, and he was taking a gift to the barber, and he had a heart attack, and he had passed there. So that was my last memory of my dad still wanting to do something. Here he was half sick. He wanted to make sure that we got our usual candy. So, yeah.
It's so funny because when I tell people that there was a Kentucky at 25th and Brooklyn, they don't remember that. I said, I remember that. And then there was Dairy Queen across the street.
Yep.
The building is still there where the Dairy Queen is. It's just nothing really. But yeah, the police station would
Right
be
by the
take that
police.
block where the Kentucky Chicken was. Well, it was quite different than the way it's developed. Yeah, it's because you were president when all this started, and I think the homes were not like they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be more of a market rate. I don't think it was an HOA that was supposed to be planned. And I remember it's almost turning back in because Truce was very active, and from 27th heading north, there were a lot of apartments and small businesses, and now it's loaded up with apartments again. But you know, the rate is, I'm sure, quite expensive. Where families used to live in apartments along Truce, and they, you know, I don't know if the family could afford that or if it was even room for a family. Because back then, you know, you might have 5 people in your family living in a 2-bedroom apartment. But yeah, it's quite different. You know, the style of home was supposed to be different than what's now the urban look that's going on down there. They were supposed to be more blended to fit in with the established neighborhood, but so along the years that changed, and we have what we have now. So somewhat, some I think are willing to socialize, and some aren't. And I've noticed that with people moving into my block. You know, I've known everybody on my block, and there's some people that have moved in. You know, they drive up down the street, they won't even throw their hand up or anything like that. And being the secretary, I've taken on another title, treasurer. You know, I've reached out to neighbors. You know, but there's been no response. I have a couple across the street that they're good, but we can't get people to participate. Well, the only building that I can remember is the hospital, but not living there on that area. But it was good to see that it was redeveloped, and that was another instance. I think they wanted that to be a senior home, and then supposedly it wasn't included. Then all of a sudden, it's a senior living, because you would have stayed in the neighborhood had that been established, you think?
Before I left.
I can't really remember any iconic
No,
buildings.
not necessarily, because I lived 2 other places before I moved to the senior residence.
Did you? Okay. I don't think there are any other buildings that I can recall that were in shape that would have been tore down.
The college,
What college?
Western Baptist Seminary.
Yeah, and see, that's further down for me, so I
Yeah.
really wasn't.
Yeah, it's still there. Unfortunately, it's not functioning. I used to go there from our church every summer. Kids from Arnold, Missouri, that belong, they call it a little youth Baptist convention or something like that. And we would stay in the dormitory and have our meals and play games and go to class and everything for at least a week every summer. That's where I grew up going to that. And it was only after I moved away that, and I went into a different area, was no longer a kid, and I think that was something that they cut out after the kids had their little get-together. They didn't have anything for teens, over 17, and adults of that nature, so that was probably the last time, except for occasional meetings at that particular location.
It was my parents' home, and they were seniors, so it didn't make any sense for them to go out and purchase a new home. The neighborhood has always been great. There's no been crime. I know when my father did get ill, I switched houses with my parents because I had a small ranch out south, and they lived there, and then I moved back to the family home. Then when my father passed, I moved my mother back with me, and that's how I ended up staying there. So I don't think they really had a reason to leave. So that's why I'm here now. I inherited the house, so,
I left for other reasons, so I was comfortable. Yeah. I literally left because the house, having had these logs on it, needed to be redone because the termites had begun getting into it, and I had it declared a historic landmark. And the nature of that, when they informed me that there wasn't much they could do in terms of treating the termites, what I decided to do, because they were doing the remodeling of the neighborhood and people were selling out, I took advantage of that and asked for a price, and then I negotiated a larger price, and I understand that's kind of the way it works anyway. You start way over what you expect, and then you negotiate down to what you think you probably can. So I tried that, and they accepted my offer, and that's why I moved, simply because the house was no longer inhabitable. 1302 East 26th Street. I'd like to just briefly mention the fact that both my parents were very involved in the community. And I think my involvement came from the fact that I was often going along to meetings. My dad worked with the NAACP and a couple other community organizations that were around at that time. My mother was very active in church and in the neighborhood organization, and so that kind of set an example for me to follow. So when it came time for Dr. King and they had SCLC, I immediately joined SCLC. My daughter was getting close to age to go off to college, so she was working in the office with me, and we were distributing help to neighbors and people regardless of color to around the city. And so when they had the Poor People's Campaign in the plaza, my youngest son and I stayed in the plaza all week long and attended that. And what I witnessed was so very special. There was a kind of portly white gentleman. The first day we were there, he sat in his car and he watched. He just watched. And got kind of noticeable after a while because we were busy setting everything up, putting up tents and what have you. Second day, he watched. Third day, he came over. He said, "Can I get somebody to help me?" I said, "Yes, sir," and sent 2 or 3 people with him. He had bought cartons of pop and brought it to us to have to drink. He said, "I have sat and watched you all because I wanted to see what this was about." And he had done some investigating. He found out that we were paying people's rent their light bill and other things like that. And he said, I wanted to make a contribution. And then he gave us some cash on top of all of the water bottles and pop. And so we saw other acts like that happening as people came together and try to understand that this is about helping people regardless, and what the real message of equality was about underneath. We are all equal anyway, and we just need to recognize how to help and how to be of benefit. So like I said, my parents set the example, and I've been involved in community. Now my primary involvement is church, but that's because the community organizations now are for the younger people that can get around physically, but I can make donations and do other things to spread the word.
And you got me involved with Beacon Hill.
Mm.
Because when Mother was sick, remember you was working at the hospital, and I think we were back there at the house, and you were telling me, and I came to a meeting. That's how I got involved with Beacon Hill. Because we had Southeast, out there where I lived. I was Southeast Community Center. Community.
Yeah.
I've got that.
A great experience. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I miss work. I miss everybody, but I've stayed in touch. I have not allowed moving further south or any of that to interfere with ring-a-ding or email or some kind of communication. And so when they had their celebration, last year, the two groups.
Bruce Watkins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was so glad to get a chance to go back to see folks that I hadn't seen in a while.
Oh yeah, we had the picnic there.
Yeah. It was just anything to help, the little I could do, getting to know what people were involved and what their purposes were for doing it. And like I said, Mother and Dad planted the seed. And it was just natural. I didn't join an NAACP necessarily, but this was as well good an option in my mind. About helping people, more or less, and bringing attention of the haves to the plight of the have-nots. Because so many times, just like right now, my daughter said this the other day. She feels that in order to serve in the Senate or the House of Representatives, those people need to spend a month on the salary of somebody who's on welfare. And see, with no help, they can't call and ask somebody to run over with all their groceries. They need to find out firsthand who it is they're serving.
And learn how to stretch a dollar.
Yes, how to stretch that money, how to bargain shop, how to clip coupons, do whatever. Then maybe they wouldn't be so reluctant to go ahead and sign a stimulus bill or pass other measures that would help everyday people who they were elected to serve and protect. Not protect, but to serve. So I think this is essential that we get involved and find out who, where, how, when, and why. And answer those questions satisfactorily. Absolutely. One of the things I did, I'm still trying to contribute. I made copies of the absentee ballot. I made labels, address labels, where they could fill it out, where they could send it. I put it in the lobby. Within a couple of days, they were gone. And I had a couple of people ask me for extra ones. I ran them off. And then I took them next door. I also took a copy to my church so they could distribute that on Sunday, because I'm dealing with seniors. And I know that they all couldn't get out and go vote. And I know how important it is. So, there's all kinds of ways to help. And that's part of what the Poor People's Campaign and other associations are trying to point out. We don't have to have a fortune to do good work.
And our neighborhood is no different than any other neighborhood. And most people, when they're in a neighborhood, they know their neighbors, they interact with their neighbors. We're not in gated communities or anything else. So it's like, Hey, how you doing? I love my front porch.
Yeah. I have a porch too. Hey, gotta have it.